Stephanie Jones found that her son had died after he was discovered hanging from an electrical tower on April 14th of 2011. She's from South Bend, Indiana, and her son's death was immediately ruled a suicide, even though there is some evidence to indicate that that is not necessarily true. TYT Investigates has looked into this story and found that there are all sorts of questionable things that were done by authorities in South Bend, Indiana. And even though Stephanie Jones asked Pete Buttigieg to please help her, to please look into her son's death, her requests went ignored, and she feels that no one has any interest in helping her or listening to her story. But now TYT Investigates has uncovered the details of this story, and we're gonna share them with you today. Now first, I wanna just quickly note all of the different issues that were discovered in the son's death. First off, the coroner had ruled that it was a suicide on the scene. The issue is that the coroner had absolutely no medical training whatsoever. Okay. Also, there was no forensic examination of the scene or of the body. There was also the fact that the body was cremated before an autopsy could be done. There was also the fact that Jones was not allowed to see the scene where her son was found hanging, and Jones was asked to sign a bill for cremation minutes after her son's body, after she had seen her son's body. So she had seen her son's body for the first time, and minutes later, she was asked to sign the bill for cremation. And finally, the classmates of her son alleged that her son had an issue with a white male in the school who had threatened him, who had used racial slurs against him, and again, had threatened to cause harm to him. So these are all points that you'll see throughout the story, but I wanna give you more of what was going on, contextualize it for you. According to Jeff Harrell, who wrote for TYT Investigates, Stephanie Jones, a black woman in South Bend, sat at her dining room table in front of her son's remains and tearfully wondered why nobody, including Mayor Pete Buttigieg, ever agreed to investigate the death of her 16-year-old son. She believes he was murdered, and she's not alone in thinking that. So when it comes to the coroner, Coroner Chuck Hurley certified it as a suicide, listing the time of death as 1:50 p.m., 8 minutes after the 911 call. The official cause of death was asphyxiation by hanging, okay? Now, I wanna give you some more details, but Jake, do you wanna jump in before I do that?
Yeah, I wanna be clear about one thing. Buttigieg was not mayor when the incident happened. He became mayor later, and then Jones, the mom, asked him for help. And they were at a meeting together where they were discussing town business. It's called the South Bend Common Council. That's the city's legislative body, and that was in the summer of 2012. And in the minutes we acquired at TYT, and they do show that Buttigieg was there. And Jones went up and talked to him, and he gave her a card, and he said, "Call me, and I'll follow up on this." And she said every time that she called Buttigieg, she would only get the secretary, she would never be passed on to the mayor, and there was never any return calls. So it's about the aftermath of the investigation. And there is one other connection to Buttigieg that is potentially important. So Chuck Hurley, who was the coroner, even though he has no medical experience in that regard, as Anna told you earlier in the beginning of the story, that's already strange, but I don't know if that happens in small towns across the country. But
it actually does. It's interesting that this story was just published by TYT Investigates, because over the weekend, John Oliver had done a lengthy piece on how coroners in a lot of cities throughout the country do not have medical training and actually are underfunded.
Yeah, but the connection to Buttigieg is that the mom is asking Buttigieg to look into Chuck Hurley and how he declared it an immediate suicide. But at the time, Buttigieg had demoted the police chief, who was the first African-American police chief of South Bend, Indiana. We covered that story earlier in the Young Turks, and TYT Investigates did some great reporting on it. You can read that at tyt.com. Anyway, he had demoted the black police chief, and he had put in his place as interim police chief, Chuck Hurley. So he would have to open an investigation on the guy he just named as interim police chief. Could that explain why there was no call back to the mom?
Possibly.
It's certainly relevant, let's put it that way.
Also, I want to just quickly address an uncomfortable part of the story, which is the teen's name, Jihad Vasquez. So he's a Christian, and his absentee father had named him. So he has nothing to do with jihad, even though that is his first name. I just want to get that out of the way.
Yeah, well, actually, the fact that he's a devout Christian plays into the story later because he carries a Bible with him all the time, and several people, including his friend and family members, said he would never commit suicide. He thought people who committed suicide couldn't get into heaven. So they were perplexed when they found out, according to the authorities, that he had committed suicide out of the blue. They thought that was very unlike him. Now, again, whether that's true, of course, is very hard to determine now, but it's problematic that they did not do an autopsy, and it's problematic that they didn't look into the fight where he was called a racial slur right before this incident happened.
So there were some red flags when it came to the discovery of his body, what was missing when they discovered him, and his mother lists all the different items that were missing from the scene. So she says his school ID was missing, his wallet with $20 in cash and a ring were also missing. Most of that sheet was missing, meaning the sheet that he had taken with him to his friend's house. He was going to his friend's house for a sleepover, and he had taken a sheet from his home for the sleepover. When authorities found him, he was hanging with that sheet wrapped around his neck, and apparently only about 20% of the sheet was there. So where was the other 80% of the sheet? The mother wanted to know that. He also had an iPod with Tupac Shakur and stuff on it that was missing. So all these different items that are valuable were missing.
So look, guys, again, I don't know how small towns operate, and I don't know if the cops are super busy or they just like to be dispensed with this stuff right away. But it's definitely shoddy police work to not ask, hey, did he get into a confrontation? And one piece of evidence would be, is there anything missing from his backpack, the backpack that they found? If you find out that money's missing, his wallet is missing, his ring, an iPod, what's the first thing you think of? Any rational person thinks, well, somebody took that stuff. Maybe they took it after they saw that his body was hanging. Maybe they took it well before and then he committed suicide. But is it relevant that somebody might have taken it and then committed an act of violence on him? Of course it is. Right. Of course it is. And that might lead you to do a more thorough investigation, including an autopsy, instead of cremating him immediately.
Yeah,
which is what they did.
And I just want to give some extra information. You mentioned it's a small town. There are 100,000 people in South Bend. It is, by comparison, relatively speaking, a small town. And just to give you some more details about possible red flags that the investigator should have looked into. Jihad's last day at Penn High School had ended with him getting a 4-day suspension after fighting with a student who took his iPhone. During the fight, his friend Blake says the other student, a white male, threatened retaliation and slurred Jihad verbally with the N-word. Also, Jihad's sister, Charlene, referred to a friend of his who had mentioned specific details about where his body was located before the police discovered the body. The students at Penn High School, Jihad's classmates, knew that Jihad was dead before my mother was notified. They believe that Jihad was put there to make it look like a suicide, but it's not. This is according to a letter, again, that Charlene had written, and Stephanie Jones, the mother, read out loud to authorities in South Bend.
So I want to caution that I don't want our audience to jump to conclusions either, right? I wish they'd done a better investigation. I wish the mayor at the time had done it, and then Buttigieg had followed up when the mom asked him to. But we don't know if all the rumors that went around about people knowing about it ahead of time are true or not true. That's what you would want the cops to investigate when you have a mysterious death out of nowhere in a situation like this. There's one other piece to this mystery. Our reporter actually got to see a photo that has not been released that showed Jihad's body. And the original police report said that he was hanging 10 feet off the air. But in the picture-
Off the ground.
Off the ground, I should say, I'm sorry. But in the picture, his feet were flat on the ground and his knees bent. Now, there could be a very logical explanation for that. Maybe they lowered him and then took the picture. We don't know for sure, but it does not match what's in the police report. It's another thing that certainly was worthy of an investigation. I don't know if they can go back and do the investigation now. Of course, the number one problem is that they immediately cremated him.
Right, and let me give you some details about that, because this is also, in my opinion, a very problematic part of the story. So remember, his body was found April 14th, 2011. The death certificate indicating that Jihad was cremated was filed April 15th, the day after he was found. But Indiana state law requires that bodies be held 48 hours before cremation. So Stephanie Jones, the mother, is saying that she felt pressured to sign a bill for cremation. There's also an issue there when it comes to the different places that bodies are sent after they, are dead. So there is one funeral home that most people will send their, bodies to. And then there's one that specifically the Black community in South Bend sends the bodies to. And the reason why they do that is because they just feel safer, they feel like the treatment is fairer there. And so she's very much concerned that everything just moved so quickly and that she was pressured and coerced, she used the word coerced, into signing the bill for cremation at this particular home, and that his body was cremated before she even had a chance to think about an autopsy, think about a more thorough investigation.
Yeah, and I wanna be clear there. It's not a matter of, they sent him to the white funeral parlor instead of the black one. No, their concern is, why did they send him to the one that African Americans don't normally go to? It could have been not even a mistake. Somebody might not have known. It's not a big deal in that regard if nothing is amiss. But in this case, the guy who runs that funeral parlor is a guy named Hanley. And Hanley is the one that the mom says coerced her into cremating her son immediately. Hanley is a retired South Bend police officer who had 32 years of service in the police department, and he has very strong ties to the local police. Now, that might mean nothing, or it might mean that the cops sent the body to a guy that they know and trust, who then wanted to hurry the cremation along. But I swear to you that I'm not jumping to conclusions, and again, I'm asking you for the second time not to, because it might have been incredibly normal that somebody checks off, hey, people normally go to Hanley's for a funeral, and they send them to Hanley. So, but you can never know any of these things unless you look at it. And with the money stolen and all the other things stolen, and the fight right beforehand where he's called a racial slur, it's really unfortunate that no one ever looked into it originally, and they seem to have hurried up and just said it. And the most common reason normally is laziness. And by the way, disregard. If that was the mayor's son hanging, do you think that they would have wrapped it up immediately?
No.
Do you think they would not have done an autopsy? Do you think they would have cremated the body in 24 hours? Now, you all know the answer to that. But if it's an African American boy, their best case scenario is we didn't really care that much.
I just want to note that the reporter for this story was interviewed by John Iadarola on the damage report. So please make sure you check that out and check out his show overall. It's a really good show.
So the last part of the story is apparently before Jihad died, he said that he was worried that he had no freedom walking on the white man's ground because of how he was treated after the fight. And he apparently told his mom, "I'm still a black man with no freedom. Everybody always gets their way. Who has a voice for me?" And she said, "I have a voice for you." And so the fact that she couldn't get anyone to pay attention to the case is haunting her to this day. And she's still trying to be that voice for him. So even if there's no presidential candidate involved here, most of the time when there is injustice done in little parts of America that nobody's paying attention to, nobody ever gets justice. And so this would still be an incredibly important case if there was no one famous involved. And so I hope that someone eventually gets Jones some degree of justice and follow through that she's looking for. On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.